The fire crackled, spitting tiny embers into the inky blackness that pressed in around our small circle of light. I was Liam, and with me were my two best friends, Ethan and Maya. We'd always been thrill seekers, drawn to the edges of experience, and this weekend, we'd decided to push those boundaries, deep into the heart of the Blackwood Forest, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place where the sun struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. We were camping. We'd hiked for hours, leaving the marked trails far behind, seeking a remote clearing Ethan had found on an old, faded map. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the silence broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures and the occasional snap of a twig under our boots. As twilight deepened, a sense of unease settled over us, a feeling that we were being watched. The clearing, when we finally reached it, was eerily perfect. A circular space, almost unnaturally smooth, surrounded by towering, gnarled trees that seemed to lean inwards, forming a natural amphitheater. We pitched our tents, the nylon rustling a stark contrast to the stillness of the forest. As the last sliver of daylight vanished, we lit the campfire, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes. "Spooky, isn't it?" Maya said, her voice a little too high-pitched. Ethan, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "Just the forest, Maya, nothing to be scared of." I wasn't so sure. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense of something ancient and watchful. We told stories, trying to dispel the growing unease, but the silence between our words grew longer, heavier. As the night deepened, the sounds of the forest changed. The usual chirping of crickets and the hooting of owls were replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. It was a sound that resonated in my chest, a primal pulse that sent shivers down my spine. Then, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, a trick of the ear. But the whispers grew clearer, distinct voices murmuring in a language I didn't understand. They seemed to come from all directions, weaving through the trees, circling our clearing. "Do you hear that?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. Ethan, his bravado finally cracking, nodded, his face pale in the firelight. "Yeah, our broken bar. What is that?" The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then, a new sound joined them, the scraping of claws on bark, the rustling of heavy footsteps in the undergrowth. We huddled closer to the fire, our eyes darting into the darkness, searching for the source of the sounds. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight. They were large, luminous, and filled with an intelligence that was both terrifying and alien. More eyes appeared, then more, until the darkness was filled with a sea of glowing orbs, watching us, waiting. We were surrounded. Panic seized us. We scrambled to our feet, grabbing our flashlights, but the beams were swallowed by the darkness, revealing nothing but the glowing eyes that seemed to multiply with every passing second. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of guttural chants, a language of the forest itself. The ground beneath us trembled, and the trees swayed, as if bowing to an unseen force. Then, they moved. The creatures, whatever they were, emerged from the shadows. They were tall, horned figures, their bodies covered in matted fur, their faces obscured by shadow. Their eyes, those glowing orbs, burned with an ancient, malevolent light. They moved with a fluid, almost ethereal grace, their footsteps silent on the forest floor. They didn't attack immediately. They circled us, their glowing eyes fixed on us, their whispers a constant, unsettling drone. They seemed to be studying us, observing us, as if we were specimens in a macabre experiment. We stood frozen, our fear so intense it was almost paralyzing. We were trapped, surrounded by creatures that defied explanation, creatures that seemed to belong to a world beyond our comprehension. Then, one of them stepped forward. It was taller than the others, its eyes burning with a brighter intensity. It raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, tipped with sharp, black claws. A wave of cold washed over me, a feeling of absolute dread. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were not alone in this forest. We were trespassers, intruders in a realm that belonged to something else, something ancient and powerful. The creature's hand moved, and a wave of energy pulsed through the clearing. The fire flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. The whispers became a deafening roar, and the creatures closed in. I remember the feeling of cold, sharp claws on my skin, the sound of Maya's scream, the taste of fear so intense it was almost metallic. Then, darkness. When I awoke, it was dawn. The clearing was empty, the creatures gone. The fire was a pile of cold ashes, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something acrid and metallic. Ethan and Maya were gone. Their tents were empty, their belongings scattered. I searched the clearing, calling their names, but there was no response, only the silence of the forest, a silence that seemed to mock my desperation. I found a trail, a path of broken branches and disturbed earth, leading deeper into the forest. I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind filled with images of glowing eyes and skeletal claws. The trail led to a clearing, a place of twisted trees and gnarled roots. In the center of the clearing, I found them. Ethan and Maya were lying on the ground, their bodies contorted, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Their eyes were gone, replaced by empty sockets. I staggered back, my stomach churning, my mind reeling. I had seen death before, but nothing like this. It was as if something had reached inside them, ripped out their souls, leaving behind only empty shells. I fled, running through the forest, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the forest, until I could see the sunlight filtering through the trees, until I could hear the sounds of civilization. I never went back. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? Creatures with glowing eyes, whispers in the night, the empty sockets of my friends. I carry the memory of that night with me, a constant, gnawing fear. I know that they're still out there, in the depths of the Blackwood Forest, waiting for the next trespassers, the next victims. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that they're watching, always watching. I sometimes hear the whispers, even in the city, even in the light. The whispers of the forest, calling me back, reminding me of what I saw, of what I lost. And I know, deep down, that one day, I will have to return, because the forest never forgets, and neither do they. The old ranger's cabin stood hunched against the wind, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. We, 4 foolish college students and myself, Sarah, Ben, and Chloe had ignored the local warnings and ventured deep into the Redwood National Park, seeking a real wilderness experience. We'd found it, all right, just not in the way we'd imagined. The cabin was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, but the door hung ajar, beckoning us in with an unsettling invitation. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like old blood. We lit a lantern, its feeble glow revealing a single room, bare except for a rusted wood stove and a tattered map pinned to the wall. The map was old, its markings faded, but one symbol stood out, a crudely drawn circle, surrounded by what looked like claw marks, located deep within an uncharted section of the park. Sarah, our resident history buff, traced the symbol with a trembling finger. Local legends say this area was once sacred to the Yurok tribe, she whispered, but they abandoned it, claiming it was cursed. Ben, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. Superstition. Just an old map. Nothing more. Chloe, however, seemed unnerved. I don't like this place, she said, her voice barely audible. Let's just leave. We decided to stay. Of course, youthful arrogance and a thirst for adventure overruled common sense. We built a fire in the stove, the flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. As the night deepened, the forest outside came alive with strange sounds, the rustling of unseen creatures, the snapping of twigs, and a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Then, the scratching started. A faint, rhythmic scratching, like claws on wood, coming from beneath the floor. It grew louder, more insistent, until it was a frantic, desperate scraping, as if something was trying to claw its way up. We huddled together, our eyes wide with fear, our breaths catching in our throats. The scratching stopped, replaced by a heavy thumping, like a heartbeat, but slow, deep, and menacing. The floorboards beneath us trembled, and a cold draft swept through the cabin, extinguishing the lantern, plunging us into absolute darkness. Panic seized us. We fumbled for our flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the dust motes swirling in the air. Then, we saw it. A dark, hulking shape moved in the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form obscured by shadow, but its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. The growling started again, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. The creature moved, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, its claws scraping against the floorboards. We screamed, scrambling for the door, but it was locked, sealed shut by an unseen force. The creature was upon us, its shadow looming over us, its breath hot and fetid on our faces. Then, the whispers began, not the guttural growls we expected, but whispers, soft, sibilant whispers, in a language we didn't understand, but that chilled us to the bone. The whispers seemed to come from all around us, weaving through the air, filling our minds with images of unspeakable horror. The creature's voice, when it spoke, was a rasping, ancient sound, like the grinding of stones. "You have disturbed the slumbering ones," it said, its voice echoing in our minds. "Now, you will join them." It lunged, its claws outstretched, and the cabin was plunged into chaos. We scattered, our screams echoing in the darkness, the creature's growls and whispers filling our ears. I remember the feeling of cold, sharp claws tearing at my skin, the sound of Sarah's terrified screams, the metallic tang of blood in the air. I remember the overwhelming sense of dread, the feeling that we were being consumed by something ancient and evil. Then, silence. I awoke to the sound of bird song, the first rays of dawn filtering through the boarded-up windows. The cabin was empty, the creature gone. But the air was heavy with a sense of dread, a lingering presence that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I found Sarah and Ben outside, their bodies twisted and broken, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Chloe was gone, vanished without a trace. I fled the cabin, running through the forest, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind filled with images of glowing red eyes and rasping whispers. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station, where I collapsed, babbling incoherently about creatures and whispers. The rangers didn't believe me. Of course, they attributed my story to shock and trauma. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. I never went back to the Redwood National Park. I never went camping again. The whispers still haunt my dreams. The image of those glowing red eyes burned into my memory. I know that the creature is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting victims. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that the slumbering ones are awake, and they are hungry. The old lighthouse keeper, Silas, had warned us. The island's a fickle mistress, he'd rasped, his eyes like weathered flint. She gives, and she takes, especially at low tide. We, a group of 5 urban explorers, and myself, Alex, the tech quiz Jenna, the historian Mark, the daredevil and twins, Emily and Olivia, the photographers. They had dismissed his words as folklore, eager to explore the abandoned military outpost on the tidal island of Harrow's Reach. Harrow's Reach was only accessible at low tide, a narrow causeway of slick, barnacle-covered rocks revealing itself for a few precious hours. The island itself was a bleak, wind-swept place, dominated by the skeletal remains of a World War II radar station, its concrete crumbling, its metal rusting. We arrived as the tide receded, the causeway emerging from the churning grey sea like a skeletal finger. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, and a low, mournful wind whispered through the ruins. The radar station was a labyrinth of echoing corridors and empty rooms, the walls covered in faded graffiti and peeling paint. We explored, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, the silence broken only by the creaking of rusted metal and the distant cries of gulls. As we ventured deeper, we found strange symbols etched into the concrete walls, swirling patterns and geometric shapes that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light of our flashlights. Jenna, our historian, recognized them. "They're ancient," she said, her voice hushed, "pre-Roman, possibly even pre-Celtic. They look a broken bar ritualistic." A sense of unease settled over us. The air grew colder, heavier, and the wind seemed to intensify, its mournful whisper turning into a low, guttural moan. Then, the lights started flickering. Not our flashlights, but the faint, ghostly lights that flickered in the empty sockets of the abandoned radar equipment. They pulsed and dimmed, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted in the darkness. Alex, ever the skeptic, tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but even he seemed unnerved. "There's no power here," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's impossible." The lights grew brighter, pulsing in a rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat. Then, a sound emerged from the darkness, a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of the island. The ground beneath us trembled, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their swirling patterns pulsing with a faint, ethereal light. We were trapped. The causeway was submerged, the tide having turned, cutting us off from the mainland. The island was ours. The hum intensified, and the ghostly lights coalesced into a single, blinding beam that shot into the sky. The beam illuminated the swirling mist that had descended upon the island, revealing strange, shifting shapes within its depths. Then, the voices started. Not human voices, but a chorus of whispers, a cacophony of sibilant sounds that seemed to come from all directions, weaving through the wind, echoing through the ruins. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then, the shapes in the mist began to move. They were tall, gaunt figures, their forms obscured by the swirling mist, their eyes glowing with an eerie, phosphorescent light. They moved with a fluid, almost ethereal grace, their footsteps silent on the concrete floor. They surrounded us, their glowing eyes fixed on us, their whispers a constant, unsettling drone. We were paralyzed with fear, our bodies frozen, our minds reeling. We were trapped, surrounded by creatures that defied explanation, creatures that seemed to belong to a world beyond our comprehension. The figures moved closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. They reached out, their hands long and skeletal, their fingers tipped with sharp, glowing claws. I remember the feeling of cold, sharp claws on my skin, the sound of Emily and Olivia's terrified screams, the metallic tang of blood in the air. I remember the overwhelming sense of dread, the feeling that we were being consumed by something ancient and malevolent. Then, darkness. I awoke on the shore, the first rays of dawn warming my face. The island was shrouded in mist, the radar station a ghostly silhouette against the horizon. The causeway was still submerged, the island inaccessible. I was alone. Alex, Jenna, Mark, and the twins were gone, vanished without a trace. Their cameras, their equipment, everything was gone. I searched the shore, calling their names, but there was no response, only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. I never went back to Harrow's Reach. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? Creatures in the mist, glowing eyes, whispers in the wind. I carry the memory of that night with me, a constant, gnawing fear. I know that they're still out there, on the island, waiting for the next low tide, the next unsuspecting victims. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that the island never gives back what it takes.